I am welcoming you in our tonight webinar, a joint event with our Turkish Cypriot Friends of GLOPOL. This action is one of many which OPEK is undertaking in the frame of the citizens' engagement actions co-funded by the European Parliament. So Eastern Mediterranean has experienced recently and maybe still experiencing an escalation of the crisis concerning the bilateral and multilateral relations. During this crisis, it has been obvious that three factors are very crucial. The long-lasting situation of stalemate on the Cyprus problem, the Greek-Turkish relations, and the EU-Turkish relations. Under the light of the fact that we are having in procedure certain efforts on all the three factors, we are here tonight to discuss about these procedures, their interaction, and their prospects. For clarifying all this, we are glad to have the guidance of our eminent speaker, Professor Nathalie Tocci. We are all very thankful for her kind acceptance of the invitation, and we are eager to hear from her. So maybe it's better to gain some time hearing from our specialist. Erhan, my friend Erhan can continue.
Well, thank you, dear Paulos, dear friends, colleagues. Welcome, dear Nathalie. Very nice to see you with us. We are very much eager to hear your recent evaluation regarding the region, and furthermore, maybe a few words. Many of you know Nathalie Tocci. She has undertaken extensive research and studies on the Cyprus problem. And as you know, her inputs, particularly with regards to the Turkey-EU relations, have been very affluent for everyone who is involved in these topics. We are thus pleased to have Nathalie to listen to her valuable speech prior to 5+ UN meeting, which is scheduled to happen end of April. Timely, it's a very important time, not just for Cyprus, but as you know, Turkey and Greece held their exploratory talks yesterday in Athens. So the situation is developing in the region, and at this time, we are happy to have Nathalie. So thank you for being with us, Nathalie.
I will be coordinating this event together with İpek Borman, Secretary General of GLOPOL. I'm Kyriakos, Pierides, and journalist and Vice President of OPEK. İpek Borman, you have the first shot, okay?
Thank you. Good evening to all.
Good evening.
Who are here with us this evening. Welcome and thank you for attending our webinar organized jointly by Global Policy Center, an association for social reform, with the participation, of course, of a very distinguished keynote speaker, Professor Tocci. So this evening, we will be discussing the prospects of the Turkish-EU relations, and in relation to that, the prospects of a win-win agenda for Cyprus. When we say for Cyprus, of course, we mean both Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots, Greece and Turkey, on the other hand, as actors which happen to be the sites of the ongoing Cyprus problem, on the one hand, and on the other hand, whose relationship has been strained, especially over the last couple of years in the Eastern Mediterranean due to the exploration and exploitation of the hydrocarbon resources of the island of Cyprus, among others. there is also an EU dimension on top of that. Greece and the Greek Cypriot side are full-fledged EU member countries, whereas Turkey's EU membership bid is stalled for the moment. And while Turkish Cypriots are considered to be EU citizens, the Turkish Cypriot side is not accepted by the EU on an equal footing, as is the case with the UN. So what we see today surrounding these countries, actors, is a very complex web of relations intertwined with different yet very much interrelated problems. Of course, the main ones being the non-settlement of the Cyprus problem and problems that arise and persist as a result of it or because of it, such as the one over the hydrocarbons issue in the region. So let's start the discussion with our main title and have Professor Tocci's evaluation regarding the prospects of EU-Turkish relations first, and then maybe move on to this impossible question of how, again, Ms. Tocci assess this rather complex web of relations as we speak. So the floor is yours.
Okay, İpek, well, thanks very much, and thanks to all of you for this opportunity. I mean, it's great to be back in Cyprus. I mean, I wish I could be there physically, but this is the next best thing, I guess. Indeed, let me sort of start by giving you a sense of where I think we are when it comes to the EU-Turkey relationship, and then indeed perhaps we can sort of broaden out a little bit further into the web of interrelated problems and crises in the region. So I think as far as EU-Turkey relations are concerned, I mean, basically I think where we are is we've taken a step back from the brink. But before sort of looking ahead at what lies after the brink, I think it's worth sort of understanding how is it that we got to the brink. It is clear that this is a relationship which, in many respects, sort of has gone through decades of repeated ups and downs, and the ups and downs in the relationship are endemic to the relationship itself. But at the same time, every time that the relationship has approached, in a sense, a point of no return, there has been an instinct on both one side and the other to take a step back. And I think it's important to bear that in mind, because the reason why this is the case is that this is a multifaceted, multidimensional relationship. And it's a relationship which has, yes, a political dimension, but it has an economic dimension, it has an energy dimension, it has a security dimension, it has a migration dimension, it has an identity and cultural dimension, a social dimension, and I could go on and on and on with the list. And given this intricate web of relations, which means that even if one aspect, notably and often the political, goes pear-shaped, and it really does look like we have reached the point of no return, the effect that all of the other dimensions have is to prevent the relationship from spilling over into a point of no return. And, we have seen it perhaps not as acutely as we've seen it over the last months, but this is something which has been, in a sense, a structural feature of the EU-Turkey relationship. And to me, this is an important aspect to bear in mind, because when we do look at Turkey today, and here I'm mainly thinking about the domestic political situation in Turkey, it is, frankly speaking, and I'll speak very openly here, very easy to despair. I mean, it is clear that Turkey has been on a path of how, if you want to put it very kindly, de-democratization, if you want to put it slightly less kindly, sliding authoritarianism over the course of the last decade. And what you do when you're faced with a country which is such an important country in your, in your backyard, and you feel that you meaning the European Union, you have to react to it. Well, you generally have two approaches. You use the stick or you use the carrot. Basically, you don't have much else. And the reason why I have personally, when it comes to Turkey, always been very skeptical of the use of the stick is because I think that when it comes to Turkey, there is not a credible stick to wang. Precisely because this is a relationship that is so multifaceted and that no one can afford reaching and going beyond that point of no return. The idea of severing relations, imposing, for instance, meaningful sanctions, probably would, from a logical perspective, could deliver. So I would not necessarily be against it, but practically speaking, I struggle to see how one would get the internal consensus within the union to actually make it happen, and make it happen in a way which is meaningful enough to actually have the potential to effect change in Turkey itself. So if from a political, in a sense, perspective, I mean, simply based on an analysis of what the situation is and will remain, one excludes one sort of avenue, then one has to think about what the alternative is. And what is the alternative if one thinks about the carrot? Unfortunately, I think that, there are good carrots and there are bad carrots. Let me put it this way. And I think that the mistake that we've been making as Europeans is to engage and think about the bad carrots. The bad carrots is basically what falls into the domain of, I would say, transactionalism. Yeah. So, you give something, you get something in return, but there is not an overall rules-based structure guiding or determining basically the relationship. In many respects, one can look at the EU-Turkey statement on migration dating back to 2016 as epitomizing this approach. So it's a sort of don't des approach. It holds, the quote-unquote social contract holds, there is a give and a take, but it isn't rules-based in any shape or form. And this, I think, is something that, unfortunately, the European Union has been doing in a way which has actually enabled not Turkey, but the Turkish president to actually have far greater bargaining power, if you like, vis-a-vis the European Union than a different form of carrot, which I would say is a rules-based framework for the relationship, would actually enable him to have, whereas on the contrary, I think a rules-based framework would actually enable the European Union itself to have far greater leverage on Turkey. Now, to sort of end on this first set of remarks, what is a rules-based framework when it comes to Turkey? Well, surely all of you may be thinking now, I mean, Nathalie must have already had it, in Rome it's 10 to 6, a bit too much to drink. Surely it can't be the accession process. I mean, surely that is dead in the water. And indeed, I still have not had a drink, so I know that. It's a terrible shame that this is the way things are, but it is reality. And again, I try and look at things in a way which is as kind of, cool-headed and pragmatic as possible. But although it would have been the ideal rules-based framework to have real political influence on Turkey, that is not a realistic possibility at the moment. But there is another rules-based framework, which in my view is the idea of proceeding on a modernization of the customs union. Now, a modernized customs union is not as thick or as wide as the accession process. It's a far more limited sort of framework for contractual relations, but it is by definition rules-based. And there are ways of exerting forms of conditionality and rule enforcement on Turkey. And it does touch on aspects of the political economy which really do, I mean, they are the political economy, so they really do kind of impinge on sort of important, key areas of governance, if you like, on Turkey. And I think it's a terrible shame for Europeans, having looked at the modernized customs union as a sort of gift, that one would give to Turkey. And obviously you don't want to reward Turkey given the way in which Turkey has been behaving, or rather the Turkish government has been behaving, rather than seeing a modernized customs union as something that would actually enable the European Union to rechannel the relationship within the boundaries of a rules-based framework where it, rather than Erdogan, has far greater bargaining power. And I'll stop there for those first remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Tocci. One of the key questions raised from many people is whether Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan is sincere in his bid to return back to Europe. How do you evaluate the latest moves, especially on creating a real agenda of human rights and declaration about the 2023 target, etc.? Do we have enough common ground and vested interests that can bring both sides together and search for a positive agenda? I
mean, look, in a word, is it, how genuine or how, sort of instrumental it is? I don't think it's genuine at all. I mean, let's, I'm not gonna, I personally don't buy it, but it doesn't matter. I mean, what matters is that there has been, out of, I think, pure sort of opportunistic reasons, there has been a reassessment of what is politically convenient for the Turkish president to do for his own purposes. And that's fine. There's an element of transparency in a sense to it. It's fine. Let's play along with this, because if you do play along with it, you create a lock-in effect. I mean, if you, sort of say you you say you want to cooperate with me, and I know that you're lying, but I take you at face value, and I do start cooperating with you. And that generates a dynamic which then creates, perhaps some facts which maybe you didn't want, to see happen. But so basically it creates a dynamic. So I think, in a sense, my answer to the question is a very clear-cut one, that it is not genuine, but then I would add to it, and so what? It is in our interests to actually pretend that it's serious and ensure that, as I said, creates a number of effects.
İpek? Do you like to continue with further inputs from your side, questions to Professor Tocci?
Yes, please. Maybe, possible EU's role. I mean, I would like to ask about an evaluation of EU's role from the EU standpoint. Because amidst all these, the factors, the elements that you mentioned, there is clearly a Cyprus problem within the EU, and maybe an EU problem within the Cyprus problem as well, which both have repercussions for the prospects of cooperation over the Eastern Mediterranean. So what can the EU do or should do better to be able to address more effectively these problems surrounding, Cyprus, Greece, Turkey, and have a more inclusionary approach on both fronts, including Turkey and Turkish Cypriots. For example, when we look at the Council conclusions, the wording, on the one hand, there is no mention of Turkish Cypriots at all. It's as if, the Turkish Cypriot side as a main side of the Cyprus problem does not exist. And on the other hand, EU, of course, stands firm with its, member countries, but despite the impossibility or the hardships, in Turkey's EU bid, Turkey also should, be in this picture in a more, cooperative manner. So, how can EU approach more differently to, be able to bring all the involved parties together, especially when there is this prospect of a multilateral conference with respect to, the hydrocarbons issue?
Okay, so, I think that big part actually of the problem of recent years, really. And then of course there was an escalation over last summer and last fall, but it has really been building up over the last, I would say, 5-6 years, is the fact that what we have been seeing is that what were old problems in the Eastern Mediterranean, Greece, Turkey, set of issues, maritime airspace, etc. We know what falls into that box. So old set of problems, number one. Old set of problem, the Cyprus problem, obviously, number two. Hard enough, as we know, this is kind of, the people like ourselves that have been following this for a number of decades, we know it's hard. These issues are hard enough as they are. In fact, they're hard enough, so hard that they have not been solved for decades. The problem has been that over the last years, on top, or rather intertwined with these two sets of issues, we have seen the addition and expansion to other issues. So what we've basically seen is the energy question coming in. And the energy question, it automatically brought into the picture a number of other actors, from Egypt to Italy, to France, to UAE, etc. Israel, of course. So you have, if you like, an expansion through energy. You have an expansion through Libya. So again, you bring in Egypt, you bring in UAE, you bring in Russia, alongside Turkey, and of course Libya itself. Then you have the mix, the sort of the explosive mix over, if you like, the broader conflict, I would say, about the role of political Islam, which basically sees, again, I'm slightly simplifying here, but Turkey, UAE at loggerheads with one another, as well as in many respects, France, UAE on the one hand, and Turkey Turkey, Qatar on the other, which again, sort of expands the geography, because we're bringing into the East Med conundrum a set of other issues which add to what was already a couple of intractable problems, as we know. So my personal view about all of this is that if you want to get anywhere, I wouldn't even say near a solution, because I think, that's, frankly speaking, pie in the sky. But if you want to get at least away from a dynamic or a risk of escalation, what you need to do is start untangling some of these things. Because some of these pieces are, they could be more amenable to a solution, others less, and some in some ways, some in other ways. So just to give you an example, Libya, I think at the moment is in a sense the most promising candidate. I don't think that it's easy to think about, I'm not suggesting here that rebuilding a united state in Libya is an easy quest, but what we've seen is partly because of a readjustment that has to do, I think, with the fact that there is a Biden administration in the United States. And this has led to sort of readjustments on the side of Egypt, of Turkey, of UAE. We know that these parties are beginning to talk. And we know now that there is a new interim government, the Debate government, which, arduous task, obviously seeing the country through to new elections. But, I think what was achieved a couple of days ago wasn't a historic achievement. The fact that after 7 years of total stalemate, you do have an interim government that was approved by, sort of rival factions, basically. So I think, when I look at the situation, I say, Libya, this is, when it comes to EU-Turkey, a more promising avenue for cooperation. Then you turn and you say, well, how about Greece-Turkey? Well, there I would say, perhaps I'm not very optimistic as far as resolution is concerned, but I am far more optimistic than I was as far as conflict management is concerned. So as you were mentioning in the introduction, the exploratory talks have started once again after years again of stalemate. Now, we know that exploratory talks are not a guarantee for a breakthrough. I mean, this was what, the 61st, 62nd, I can't even remember, round of exploratory talks. But hey, I mean, it's better than not having them. I mean, we kind of look back at the 2000s and compared to the situation last year, the 2000s seemed paradise in Greek-Turkish relations. Because at the very least, if you have that mechanism of dialogue, you avoid the risk of an escalation. Channels of communication are open, and that in and of itself has value. Obviously, it is not the same value as actually getting to a solution. And on this, I would say, as I said, I'm not particularly optimistic, but we, as you will have gathered from everything that I've said until now, we live in an imperfect world, and it is better than nothing. Then we come to energy. And energy, I think that, again, here we haven't quite seen the much action in terms of real de-escalation. I mean, beyond exploratory vessels not being in waters at the moment, okay, fine. But in terms of really moving towards a solution, but again, on energy, I think that in many respects, energy has been a proxy for conflict. It has not been a driver of conflict. I mean, if Turkey was really driven by energy when it comes to the Eastern Mediterranean, it simply would not, I mean, many of the things that we've seen happen would not make sense. I mean, if Turkey was really thinking about energy, it would not have escalated in the Eastern Mediterranean at a time when it actually discovered important reserves in the Black Sea. It would not have done it in what was 2020, the worst ever year for fossil fuel prices. It would not have done it at a time when its own energy demands have actually been reducing over the last couple of years. If it was really thinking about energy, and if it was thinking about, therefore, the need for it to diversify its energy sources, which, as we know, are largely dependent on Russia, it would not be acquiring S-400s from Russia. It would not be inviting Russia to build its nuclear power plant. So obviously, energy is not it. Energy has become a proxy for conflict, and it has exacerbated what are ultimately sovereignty-related conflicts in the region. And I think it's important to bear this in mind, because if one actually does tackle head-on the sovereignty-related disputes that there are in the region, then automatically one discovers that actually when it comes to energy, solutions are there to be found. Because gas does not play the role that it played when those reserves were first found, because now, the energy discussion in the European Union is not even about energy security anymore. It's about Green Deal, So it's the paradigm for the whole discussion has completely changed. But as I said, to the extent that energy has been associated with these sovereignty disputes, it has been not amenable to a solution. And then to sort of get to, obviously, Cyprus itself. here, and you know, sort of, I feel terrible to kind of, you know, sort of disappoint. I'm not very optimistic at all. I'm not very optimistic at all because, of course, it's fantastic. You know, talks in Geneva start again after a disaster in Crans-Montana. Okay, we're all, you know, sort of happy about this. But, you know, in all honesty, in what way has what I would define as the political opportunity structure of the conflict changed? I mean, you know, what is it that makes us think that this time will be different? I don't see those conditions, to be honest. And on this, maybe I'll stop there because I would love you all to tell me that I'm wrong on this.
Thank you, Professor Tocci. I know that every time we touch upon this, the Cyprus issue, there is a reluctant people. They try to define what is happening really on the ground, whether there are sincere efforts every time we try to negotiate a solution and to reach to the point to strike a deal, we run away from the talks, etc. But I would like to ask you, because mostly the audience are raising questions in relation with the influence of the European Union on Turkey and the other protagonists, not just Turkey. We are talking also about the government of the Republic of Cyprus, as well as Greece, whether you consider that they seize the opportunities they have, if any, in order to put things together, or they just create a messy situation which cannot result to anything. So it's not just a question what is Turkey doing and what the intentions of Turkey are. We have to question also the stance of the other key players. What is your point of view vis-a-vis the government of the Republic of Cyprus? I would say also the government of Kyriakos Mitsotakis with the heavy surname, and the overall role of the European Union.
Yeah. Well, again, you know, on this, I'm afraid and this is why, you know, this is where the pessimism comes from. I personally don't see that, whether it's the Republic of Cyprus, whether it's Greece, and we've already talked about Turkey, I really don't sense a real push to do what it takes towards a settlement. And we know that even when political conditions do exist, again, you know, let's go back to the early 2000s. The political conditions in Greece existed. In Turkey, they existed. You know, well, we know what the situation in Cyprus was. They existed on one side and ultimately they didn't exist on the other. But what I'm trying to say here is that even when it really did look like the stars were almost aligning, it was impossible to achieve. And I don't think that the current government in Greece has the same incentive as its predecessors did in the early 2000s. And I don't think that the current government in the Republic of Cyprus really has more incentives than it did back in 2004. And already there, they weren't very high, frankly speaking. So again, you know, I wish this was not the case, but I struggle to see something different. Now, coming to the European Union, which actually I didn't mention and I should have mentioned more. My personal view about this is that, you know, I think the EU has and should be doing a lot more on some aspects of the broader, I mean, you know, this interrelated set of East Med problems. I think that the EU should be far more active on Libya. Obviously, it should be far more active in terms of getting reversing the vicious cycle in its relationship with Turkey. But if you ask me, should the EU become more active on Cyprus or on Greece-Turkey set of issues? My answer is unambiguously no. The EU is structurally biased when it comes to these problems for reasons of membership, full stop. I mean, you know, and it's not a question of being, you know, if it's right or wrong. I mean, it's simply the way it is. So I think that when it comes to Greece-Turkey set of issues, if we are looking for an international organization that should be doing more of the heavy lifting, I think that's NATO. And I think that as far as Cyprus is concerned, well, we know what the international organization that can do anything about this is, and it's the United Nations. Now, of course, it does not mean to say that the EU has no role to play, but it's not a role that, you know, it's a role of accommodating anything that comes out of talks, in the way in which was the case, you know, back in 2004. And I think anything more active than that is actually counterproductive. Again, because of this structural bias inbuilt in the union itself.
İpek,
yeah, thank you very much. So, Professor Tocci, what to expect?
I can't hear you, İpek.
EU leaders.
No, sorry, I lost you there. Can you repeat that?
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
yes.
So, what to expect, or can we expect anything coming out of the upcoming EU Leaders Council at the end of this month? I mean, in relation to, you know, EU being able to bringing all the involved parties together within the framework of a multilateral conference.
I mean, look, I think that, again, let me put it this way. A conference is useful to the extent that it enables everyone to sit around at a table and talk. If, on the one hand, one gets bogged down to who's going to sit around the table to talk, then I mean, what's the purpose of it? Given that you're not going to solve anything through a conference. I mean, nothing is ever solved in a conference. So the purpose of it is getting people to talk. And if you end up making it a point of argument, you know, sort of, and disagreement, discussing who's going to talk in the first place, I struggle to see the purpose of it. In the same way as I struggle to see the purpose of a conference which lumps together issues which, as I was mentioning, are already difficult enough to resolve independently, let alone if you lump them all together. I mean, what is one going to get out of a conference in which you bring in energy, Cyprus, Greece, Turkey, maybe a bit of Libya too? I mean, what is the purpose? As I said, the purpose exists to the extent that it's in the process. So if the process is an inclusive process, if one can agree on everyone sitting down to talk, then it has value, not because it achieves anything, but because it's a process. But if the process itself becomes, you know, contested, then you're not even achieving that sort of set of goals. So I'm not. I think this is something that has to be treated and treaded on very, very carefully.
Mm-hmm. Professor Tocci, you mentioned that we need heavyweight power to be engaged in the complexities of the Eastern Mediterranean, and you mentioned NATO. Do you think that we should expect a different U.S. role under Joe Biden administration? And there is also the question from my friend John Koenig, former ambassador in Cyprus. Shall we give priority to the Aegean issues instead of waiting for the Cyprus issue to be developed?
No, I didn't hear that last question. Can you say that again?
The question of John Koenig is whether we shall give a priority to the Aegean instead of trying to bring everything together as a package or try to solve the Cyprus issue. The conditions are not there.
Yeah. Well, on the second question, I would say, yes, I think that is exactly what should be done. You know, you should be sort of starting with sort of defining these as low-hanging fruits is a bit odd, I realize, but okay, slightly less high hanging fruits. And I think, you know, the Aegean is definitely less high than the Cyprus problem. And in any case, as I said, the more you untangle, the better it is, because these are all issues which are complex enough as it is. As far as the US and the Biden administration is concerned, I don't expect the Biden administration to make the East Med, in fact, to make the Middle East a priority. I think that foreign policy bandwidth in the United States is going to be relatively limited, full stop. I think that most of the attention is going to be on domestic questions, whether it is COVID response, economic recovery, race relations, democratic resilience. I mean, they've got enough on their plate. So that is going to be the priority, not foreign policy. But even if we do look at US foreign policy, I think that the Middle East, let alone the Eastern Mediterranean, which is even further down the list, but the Middle East is not even going to feature in the first 3 priorities of this administration. Okay, maybe with the exception of the Iran nuclear deal. But, you know, its priority is Asia. It's Asia, you know, it's China first, China second, and China third. And then maybe a bit of Iran nuclear deal and multilateralism and climate and et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think, I can't imagine a hugely more proactive US role than was the case, forget Trump, but was the case during the Obama administration. Now, does that mean that therefore the US is irrelevant? No, absolutely not. You know, I think that it is fascinating in many respects how I think that many of the things that we've been seeing in the region since January are, I think, to an extent, an effect of the indirect effects of not the action, but the existence of the Biden administration. You know, I think that the fact that, you know, the sort of Saudi-Qatari relation is sort of, you know, those relations have reopened. I think the fact that Egypt and Turkey are talking, Turkey and UAE are talking, the fact that Turkey itself in the Eastern Mediterranean has, you know, is now playing a more cautious game, and it says that it's kind of in love with Europe again. I think all this is an indirect effect, at least partly, to the fact that you have an administration in the United States that has a different foreign policy orientation, which does not believe that winner takes it all, that, you know, it is all about one side winning over the other. You know, it is the messages that the Trump administration sent to the region which ignited a dynamic that crystallized division, that exacerbated divisions, that, you know, sort of to give the sort of energy example, you know, you have an East Med gas forum, which is everyone against Turkey forum. And all this, I think, would not have happened. I'm not saying that the Trump administration did this, by the way. What I'm saying is that it conveyed a philosophy, which was a divisive philosophy. I think that now with the Biden administration, which like the Obama precedents, it really conveys a message of we want to retreat from the Middle East. And precisely because we want to retreat, we want you guys to kind of more or less get on and find regional balances and, you know, just kind of deal with your own region. And this generates incentives. Or rather disincentives, depending on how you want to look at it. So I think, as I said, I don't imagine the US playing a very direct, prominent role at all, but I think that even if it doesn't, it's already having its effects.
We have received a number of questions on the chat in relation with the role of the European Union. As you mentioned, EU is biased and can only accommodate what will be decided by the two sides in Cyprus. What happens in practice, and I'm trying to convey what I understand from the questions of Turkish Cypriots, both Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots attending to this web discussion, Professor Tocci, is that these people were abandoned, especially Turkish Cypriots are marginalized and they are nowhere. There is no clear future. It's an existential issue for them. While the pro-peace and pro-European forces in the south, I mean, among the Greek Cypriots, are also marginalized because of the situation now. So the idea of having an EU as trying only to accommodate the situation, I don't know what would be the outcome of that. What we see is things are becoming worse and worse. And I think there has to be a European reply to what is happening in Cyprus.
I mean, what can I say? I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you. The problem, as we know, is that it's about the way in which the European Union functions. You know, the European Union functions in a manner in which who sits in the council are representatives of states, of governments, and therefore the EU is not aware of the problems as you would describe them in Cyprus, because for the EU, Cyprus is the way in which the government of the Republic of Cyprus represents Cyprus, and Greece is the way in which the government of Greece represents Greece. And everything else is almost non-existent. And so, if anything, you know, if you say Cyprus to a European official, it will be about having to be even more divisive, even more assertive or aggressive vis-a-vis Turkey. It will not be about, you know, how can I ensure that I have a more inclusive approach. So this is what I meant by a structural bias. Now, given that this is the situation, and again, you know, given that I try and look at things in a way which is principled on the one hand, but also pragmatic on the other, I say, well, we're not going to change this European Union. I mean, we should change it, but it would be a structural change of the European Union, and it's not going to happen. So I would therefore prefer to see the EU act less on all of this, because the way in which it acts is, in my view, counterproductive, structurally counterproductive.
Mm-hmm. İpek?
Yeah. So there are a lot of, replies coming from the audience regarding this pessimism. So it's, we already have much pessimism. We already have had much pessimism here on the island.
You shouldn't have done this.
So I mean, we were at least we were trying to be hopeful with the upcoming the council meeting and the 5+ UN meeting. And also possible role for the EU, which was also requested by, Mr. Borrell himself when he, met with the Turkish leader. So at this we were experiments in that, but how there has been a leader change in the Turkish Cypriot side as well. And, along with it, the policy, the Turkish Cypriot policy together has changed from, you know, one supporting zonal bicommunal federation, now to a solution based on two, you know, equal sovereign states. So there are a lot of questions from the audience asking, how do you see this move, or how do you assess this move? Do you assess it part of, you know, a broader policy of Turkey regarding the island and the prospects of a solution?
Yeah, you kind of, I lost you now and then, but I think I got the question. I mean, on Turkey, sort of, you know, changing its position away from bizonal bicommunal federation towards two states. You know, I read everything that the Turkish president does on foreign policy through the lens of domestic politics and domestic expediency, political expediency. So I think that the position that was expressed in a particular context when Erdogan felt that it was, his calculation was obviously that it was politically expedient for him to kind of do some, you know, a bit of chest beating, and, you know, it was part of a broader picture. It was part of vessels being sent in the Eastern Mediterranean. It was about, you know, sort of reciprocal insults with President Macron. It was part of a much broader story. Now, for the reasons that we were discussing earlier, there's Biden, there's, you know, the economic situation in Turkey. There are a number of things that, for very superficial reasons, are inducing the Turkish president to take a step back. So I guess the question then is, you know, so how solid is this a change of position in Turkey? I don't think it's a particularly consolidated change. You know, I think that if the Turkish president feels that he has an interest in going back and saying something different, he will. If he has an interest in not saying anything at all, he will say nothing at all. So, you know, I would not give too much. I mean, I wouldn't read it necessarily as a definitive change of position of Turkey Inc., you know.
Professor Tocci, there is a question.
That was the only note of optimism, by the way, in the entire talk.
I think we need a source of optimism if we try to address the issues in a rational way in all levels. If indifferent leadership in both sides of Cyprus coincide in favor of a federal solution, would it be a reason for Turkey to block it? And this is one of the questions, I should say, by addressing current politics. Do you consider that this diplomacy engineered by the Republic of Cyprus, Greece, Egypt, Israel, even the United Emirates, do serve the stability and the cooperation in the area? And one more question, is it actually in favor of European interests?
Yes, I mean, I think, well, my answer is no. This has been exactly the form, you know, the way in which, as again, I think as an indirect effect of the Trump era, you know, the incentives sent to the region was, you know, you kind of gang up with the sort of, you know, your enemies' enemies are your friends, basically. I mean, this was the mentality, basically. And so, whereas this was portrayed as multilateralism, and multilateralism surely is good, the truth is it was simply a means of sort of consolidating one's camp, if you like, against the others. And whether sort of, public enemy number one for Greece or for Cyprus, or I would say even for UAE, is Turkey. Public enemy number one maybe for Saudi Arabia was more Qatar. But they all kind of fell into the two blocks. I think, and again, perhaps to sort of end on this more optimistic note, I think this moment is over. And I think that the signals that we're receiving of, different parties beginning to talk again, we know that they haven't changed their positions, they haven't changed their objectives, but they are beginning to change their strategies. And yes, maybe it's superficial, it's opportunistic, but the argument that I was making earlier in the context of the EU-Turkey relationship, I think can be applied more broadly. Let's capitalize on this because it creates lock-in effects. And so this is, I think, the sort of mentality that we should be in, saying, that there is a potential that has now opened up. Let's try and see what we can do with it. And maybe we will not be able to solve the Cyprus problem, but maybe we can make it a little bit better. Maybe we can agree on whatever, an escrow account over energy. So maybe there are bits and pieces that we can get done. That will put us in a better position than where we were when things really looked like they could slip out of control only a few months ago.
I would open the floor, İpek, if you agree, also to Erhan and Pavlos if they want to ask any question. And of course, it's open to the other friends of our audience. Thanks. Mary Southcote is also setting a question. I will try to summarize it while listening to Erhan and Pavlos. Erhan?
Thank you, Kyriakos. Nathalie, it's been very comprehensive analysis of the situation. Basically, keeping Turkey out of some equations in the region created serious interrelated issues, not just for Cyprus, but also for European Union. You would recall that it was in '97 when, in a similar case, at the Luxembourg European Council, Turkey was excluded. We had a similar situation until '99 Helsinki. And only by then, when we had a more inclusive approach, we started having more meaningful negotiations between Greece and Turkey, rapprochement between Turkey and Israel and other countries in the region. And as we all know, also about Cyprus negotiations, you are right about the developments with regard to Turkey, and I see your point, and I fully agree that a rule-based approach is needed more than ever, and we have to be pragmatic that this accession negotiation process could not be revitalized in the near future. Nevertheless, I'm not quite confident that modernization of customs union could be sufficient for this rule-based relationship. At the same time, we should try to do these things, but don't you think that we need to be, or we should strive to ask for more inclusive approach from Brussels vis-a-vis the region? Because you're right, customs union is quite straightforward. Institutions are well placed, rules are there, but would that be a sufficient leverage for all these interrelated issues to be tackled in a different way? I share your pessimism on this point, but still a pragmatic approach is needed, and at the same time we need to develop more incentives on the side of EU you are right that EU structurally could not take a more prominent actor, but perhaps it's high time for Brussels to come up with some further incentives. Otherwise, these dialogues that are going to take place and conferences, I agree with you, they are not right instruments to resolve the problems. And yes, if you could have a few sentences. Thank you very much for your generous time, by the way, and looking forward to see you in Cyprus next time.
Yeah, well, I mean, thank you for all of this. I mean, it's as I said, great to be back virtually, at least in Cyprus. I mean, just to sort of end on all this. Yes, I agree with you. I mean, sort of obviously the customs union is not enough. My question is, where do we start? Where do we start? What is the good place to start to put the EU-Turkey relationship on a rules-based track? And that is the best answer that I can come up with. Is it sufficient? No, it's not. But what is necessary, above all, in my view, is to shift, not only to get out of the escalation mode that we were in, okay, that's a no-brainer, but also I don't want to go back to the mode that we were in 2016, 2017, which was entirely transactional. That to me is perhaps not as bad as escalation, but kind of coming close to it, So, as I said, insufficient, but we've got to start somewhere, and that's the best place I can think of.
Pavlos, final say before we close.
Okay, just a few words from me. Not exactly questions, because I have in mind two philosophers. The first one, Plato, said everything has been said. Anything else is just notes under the text of what has been said. So no question from me, and everything was very comprehensive and really clear, and I thank you very much for that, Nathalie. I think that the voices like yours spread it in the Cyprus audience, Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot, are very useful in order to stop facing things on the climax of optimism and pessimism. Baruch Spinoza, the second philosopher, said, neither to cry with things nor to laugh with them, just to understand them. That's what we need in Cyprus. Stop dreaming and stop materializing in our minds what we are dreaming. Reality is needed. So thank you very much for being with us and for clarifying so many things which are helping us to focus on certain issues very crucial on the problems of our region, and especially on the Cyprus problem. Thank you very much, Nathalie.
Thank you. It's been lovely being with you.
Thank you, Nathalie, Tocci, for this occasion. And of course, both OPEK and GLOPOL wish very much to stay in touch with you and your institution. And we are looking forward for closer cooperation. Part of our job, based on the co-funded project of the European Parliament, is to produce policy papers, and we do need to address issues, having your input and also giving you the chance to listen to our voices as well. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution.
Bye-bye to all. Bye-bye.
Bye.